The morning sun rose over the city of Shinman like it did every other day. The light was not real sunlight. It came from giant machines in the sky that made the colony feel like home. But for the 2 million people living on Nova Dajan, it was their sun. It was their home. Hannah Lim walked to work with a cup of warm tea in her hands. She was 23 years old and worked at the Planetary Communication Station. Her job was simple. She made sure messages traveled between Nova Dajan and Earth. She liked her work. She liked her life. The colony was peaceful, filled with farmers and miners and families who had come here to build something new. The rice fields stretched for hundreds of kilometers outside the city. They grew under the artificial light, feeding millions of people across human space. Children played in the streets. Old men sat on benches and talked about the old days on Earth. Women sold fruit in the market squares. It was an ordinary morning on an ordinary world. Hannah entered the communication station and greeted her supervisor. It's an old man named Tayson Yu. He had white hair and kind eyes. He had worked at this station for 40 years, since the colony was first built. He smiled at Hannah and handed her a list of tasks for the day. She sat at her console and began her work. Outside the window, she could see the city waking up. Transports flew between buildings. People walked to their jobs. A group of children ran past the station, laughing and chasing each other. Hannah smiled and returned to her screen. Then the sky turned dark at first. Hannah thought a cloud had passed over the artificial sun, but when she looked up, her blood turned cold. Something massive was blocking the light. Something that should not exist. 17 ships hung in the sky above Shinmen. They were enormous, each one larger than any human vessel Hannah had ever seen. Their hulls were black and covered with strange symbols. They did not look like anything humans had built. They did not look friendly. Alarms began to scream across the city. Hannah's console lit up with emergency signals from every district. People in the streets stopped and looked up. Some pointed. Some screamed. Some simply stood frozen, unable to understand what they were seeing. Tayson grabbed Hannah's arm and pulled her away from the window. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. He had survived many dangers in his long life. He knew when death had arrived. A voice echoed across the city. It came from the alien ships broadcast on every frequency. The language was strange, but translation software converted it instantly. The voice said, "This world now belongs to the Dominion. Your kind is not welcome in our territory. Consider this a lesson." Before anyone could respond, fire fell from the sky. The alien ships opened their weapons and unleashed hell upon Nova Dajan. Beams of burning plasma struck the city like hammers from an angry god. Buildings exploded into dust. Streets melted into rivers of glass. People vanished in flashes of light. Their screams cut short before they could even understand what was happening. Hannah watched through the station window as Shinmen burned. She saw the market square where she bought her morning tea disappear in a column of fire. She saw the school where her neighbors' children studied collapse into rubble. She saw everything she knew and loved turn to ash in seconds. Tayson pulled her toward the back of the station. There was a small room there with emergency escape pods. The station had them for disasters, but no one had ever used them. No one had ever imagined a disaster like this. The building shook as explosions drew closer. Hannah could hear screaming from the emergency channels on her console. Voices crying for help. Voices begging for mercy. Voices of children calling for their parents. Then, one by one, the voices went silent. Tayson pushed Hannah into an escape pod. She tried to resist, tried to pull him in with her, but the old man shook his head. His eyes were wet with tears. But his hands were steady as he activated the launch sequence. He pressed his palm against the deep space beacon. A signal would be sent to Earth. Someone would know what happened here. Someone would find Hannah. The last thing Hannah saw before the pod door closed was Tayson's face. He smiled at her, a sad and gentle smile. Then the ceiling collapsed, and he was gone. The escape pod launched into the sky as Nova Dajan died below. Hannah pressed her face against the small window and watched her world burn. The 17 alien ships continued their attack for 6 hours. They did not stop until nothing was left. Every city was destroyed. Every farm was scorched. Every person was dead. 2.3 million. People, families, children, elders, friends, lovers, dreams. All of it erased in a single day by creatures who called themselves the Velen Dominion. When the bombardment finally ended, the alien ships departed. They did not land. They did not search for survivors. They simply left, as if they had finished a minor task and had other business to attend to. Hannah's escape pod drifted in the debris field that had once been her home. She was alone. She was the only living human within light years. Her body was broken, her mind was shattered, and her heart was filled with a grief so heavy that she could barely breathe. But she was alive. The beacon pulsed steadily, sending its signal across the stars toward Earth. It was a small light in the endless darkness, a whisper in the void, a single voice crying out for someone, anyone, to hear. And somewhere, across the cold distance of space, humanity would hear that voice. They would learn what had happened to their children. They would learn the name of the enemy who had murdered millions without mercy or reason. And when they learned, Galaxy would discover something that the Velen Dominion had never imagined. Something that would change everything. Humanity did not forget. Humanity did not forgive. And when humanity was angry, the stars themselves would tremble. But for now, Hannah drifted alone in the darkness, surrounded by the ashes of everything she had ever loved. She closed her eyes and whispered the names of the dead. Her parents. Her friends. Old Tayson, who had saved her life. She whispered until her voice gave out, and then she whispered some more. The beacon continued to pulse. Help was coming. But it would not come fast enough to save Nova Daijin. Nothing could save them now. The only thing left was memory and vengeance. 3 weeks passed before the patrol ship found the escape pod. It was drifting near the Kepler relay point, its beacon still pulsing weakly in the darkness. The crew of the patrol ship did not know what they would find inside. They hoped for survivors from a transport accident or a mining vessel. They did not expect to find the last witness of a genocide. Hannah Lim was barely alive when they opened the pod. Her body was thin from hunger. Her lips were cracked from thirst. Her eyes were empty, staring at nothing. The medical team worked for hours to stabilize her. When she finally woke, she spoke only one word. Gone. The patrol ship carried her to Earth at maximum speed. Word spread quickly through the military channels. Something terrible had happened at Nova Daijin. The colony was not responding to any communications. Long-range sensors showed nothing but debris where a living world had once existed. By the time Hannah arrived on Earth, the entire United Earth Council had assembled in the Sol World Government Complex. Leaders from every human colony were present, either in person or through holographic transmission. The chamber was filled with the most powerful people in human civilization. Admiral Do-Yan Kong sat in the military gallery, watching with cold eyes. He was 60 years old, a veteran of border conflicts and pirate campaigns. He had served humanity his entire life. He had never seen the council look so afraid. Hannah was brought before the assembly on a medical platform. She was still weak, but she insisted on speaking. The doctors wanted her to rest, but she refused. She said the dead deserved a voice. She would be that voice. The chamber fell silent as Hannah began to speak. Her words were simple. Her voice was broken. But every person in that room felt her pain like a knife in their chest. She described the morning of the attack. The ordinary day that became a nightmare. She described the alien ships appearing without warning. She described the voice that called humanity unwelcome. She described the fire that fell from the sky and burned everything she loved. She described the screams she heard on the emergency channels. Children crying for parents who could not save them. Families calling for help that never came. Millions of voices silenced in hours. She described watching her world die through the window of her escape pod. When she finished, tears ran down her face. But she did not look away from the council. She looked at them with eyes that demanded justice. Eyes that would not rest until someone answered for the dead. President Young Ji Huang rose from her seat. She was 70 years old, dignified and calm. She had led humanity through decades of peace. She had never wanted war. But as she looked at Hannah, something changed in her face. Something hard and cold replaced her usual gentle expression. Before the council could respond, communication request arrived from deep space. The Velen Dominion was calling. Ambassador Borishin, the senior diplomat, advised accepting the transmission. Perhaps there had been a mistake. Perhaps diplomacy could prevent further tragedy. The holographic image of Overlord Thranis appeared in the center of the chamber. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and eyes like black stones. His voice was calm and arrogant, as if he were speaking to insects beneath his notice. He said, "Your colony violated our sovereign space. We dealt with vermin. As vermin deserve. Send more, and they will share the same fate. Humanity should remain in its cradle and trouble us no more." The transmission ended. The chamber was silent. Admiral Kang watched the faces of the council members. He saw shock. He saw fear. He saw grief. But slowly he saw something else growing in their eyes. Something that made him proud to be human. He saw anger. President Wong stood at her podium, her hands gripping the edges so tightly that her knuckles turned white. When she spoke, her voice did not shake. "It burned," she said. "They killed our children. They called us vermin. They believe we will cower and hide. They believe we will forget." She turned to face Admiral Kang directly. She said, "Admiral, how many ships can we gather?" Doyen Kong rose from his seat. His face was like stone. His voice was steady and clear. He said, "If you give me 6 months, Madam President, I will bring you 500,000 warships. Every vessel humanity has ever built. Every fighter, every carrier, every dreadnought from every colony. I will gather the greatest fleet the galaxy has ever seen." The council members looked at each other. Some were uncertain. Some were afraid. War with an unknown alien civilization was a terrible risk. Humanity had never faced such an enemy before. But then Hannah spoke again. Her voice was weak, but her words carried across the silent chamber. She said, "They did not give us a choice. They did not warn us. They did not ask us to leave. They simply murdered us because we existed. If we do nothing, they will do it again. More colonies will burn. More children will die. Is that the future we want?" President Wong nodded slowly. She looked around the chamber at the faces of humanity's leaders. Then she spoke the words that would change history. She said, "Admiral Kong, you have your 6 months. Gather our fleet. Prepare our soldiers. Let the Velen Dominion learn the truth about humanity." She paused and her eyes grew cold. She said, "We are not vermin. We are not prey. And when you hurt our children, we do not hide. We come for you with everything we have." Admiral Kong saluted. The council voted. The decision was unanimous. Humanity was going to war. Across human space, the message spread like fire. In every colony, on every station, in every home, people heard what had happened to Nova Dejin. They heard the words of the Velen Overlord, and they felt the same anger burning in their hearts. The sleeping giant had awakened. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake, and in 6 months, the Velen Dominion would discover just how terrible that mistake truly was. The shipyards never stopped. Day and night, week after week. The factories of human space worked without rest. Workers slept in shifts and ate their meals at their stations. Engineers pushed their bodies beyond exhaustion. Robots welded holes while humans guided their arms. The air smelled of burning metal and determination. Admiral Doyen Kong stood on the observation deck of the lunar shipyard and watched humanity build its answer to the Velen Dominion. Below him, the skeleton of a new dreadnought was taking shape. It would be called the Eternal Soul, and it would be the largest warship humanity had ever created. 3 kilometers of reinforced steel, carrying enough weapons to crack a moon. This ship would be his flagship. From its bridge, he would lead the greatest fleet in human history. But ships were only metal and fire. Wars were won by people, and across human space, the people were answering the call. Captain Sunwoo Park, arrived at the lunar shipyard with a box of personal belongings and a head full of tactical plans. She was 32 years old, brilliant and focused. She had graduated first in her class from the Earth's military academy. She had fought pirates in the outer colonies and won battles that should have been impossible. But the Velen were not pirates. They were something far more dangerous, and Sunwoo had spent every night since the massacre studying them. She had analyzed the sensor data from Nova Dajan. She had studied the alien ship configurations captured by long-range probes. She had found patterns in their formations, weaknesses in their shield systems, flaws in their tactical doctrine. The Velen were powerful, but they were not perfect, and Sunwoo intended to exploit every imperfection. Admiral Kong signed her as Chief Tactical Officer aboard the Eternal Soul. She accepted without hesitation. She had lost friends on Nova Dajan, classmates from the academy who had taken assignments at the colony, good people who had done nothing wrong except exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. She would make the Velen pay for every one of them. Commander Yuna Choi trained her soldiers in the mountains of Korea. She was 40 years old, a veteran of ground operations across 3 star systems. Her unit was called the 1st Light Division, and they were the best special forces humanity had ever produced. Their mission was not to conquer. It was to send a message. If the war required ground operations, they would be ready. If prisoners needed to be rescued, they would go. If justice needed to be delivered in person, they would deliver it. Yuna drove her soldiers hard. She made them run until their legs failed. She made them fight until their fists bled. She made them train in zero gravity, in burning heat, in freezing cold. She broke them down and built them up again. Stronger than before, when a young soldier asked why she pushed them so hard, Yuna looked at him with eyes that had seen too many friends die. She said, "Because the enemy killed 2 million people without blinking. If we fail, they will do it again. I will not let that happen. Not while I breathe." Lieutenant Jaewon-oh flew his fighter in the simulation chambers of Mars Station. He was 25 years old, the youngest squadron leader in the fleet. His pilots called themselves the Ghost Wing. They flew the most advanced fighters humanity had ever built. Jaewon had a reason to fight that was more personal than most. His older sister had lived on Nova Dajan. She had been a teacher at a small school in the farming district. She had taught children to read and write. She had loved her work. She had loved her life. Now she was gone, burned to ash with the rest of the colony. Her name was Miso, and Jaewon had painted it on the hull of his fighter. Every time he flew, she flew with him. Every enemy he destroyed for her. The Ghostwing practiced their attack runs day after day. They learned to move as one, to think as one, to fight as one. When the time came, they would be the tip of the spear. They would punch through the Velen defenses and open the path for the rest of the fleet. General Yoon-woo Beek organized the ground forces. 2 million soldiers volunteered from every colony. Farmers and miners, teachers and engineers, young and old. They came because they were angry. They came because they were afraid. They came because humanity needed them. Hyun-woo was 65 years old, a grandfather who should have been enjoying retirement. But when he heard about Nova Dajan, he had put on his uniform again. He had taken command again. He would fight one more time for the sake of the children who had been murdered, and across all of human space. The fleet gathered. From Earth came the ancient dreadnoughts, veterans of 100 small conflicts. From Mars came the fast cruisers, sleek and deadly. From the outer colonies came the converted freighters and retrofitted mining ships, ugly but powerful. From every station and outpost came fighters and bombers and support vessels, 500,000 ships. More than anyone had ever imagined possible. More than the galaxy had ever seen gathered in one place. Hannah Lim watched the fleet assemble from the observation deck of the Eternal Soul. The doctors had healed her body. She had asked Admiral Kang for a position on the flagship. She wanted to be there when humanity delivered its answer. Kong had made her the communications officer. She would send the message to the Velen when the time came. She would be the voice of humanity's vengeance. Meanwhile, far across the stars, the Velen Dominion watched with amusement. Their spy probes had observed the human mobilization. War Marshal Kethis reported to Overlord Thranis that the vermin were gathering their toys. Thranis laughed. He said, "Let them come. We have crushed greater civilizations. They are prey, and prey does not hunt." But Ambassador Relin, older and wiser, felt a chill in his soul. He looked at the images of the human fleet and saw something that troubled him. He said, "Overlord, no species we have ever destroyed responded like this. They should be fleeing, not building. They should be begging, not preparing. Something is different about these creatures." Thranis dismissed his concerns with a wave of his hand. He said, "They are insects. They will break against our shields like waves against stone." He was wrong. But he would not understand how wrong until it was far too late. The storm was gathering, and when it arrived, it would sweep away everything in its path. The Velen early warning system detected the disturbance first. A massive hyperspace ripple was approaching the Thalos system, the heart of the Dominion. The sensors had never recorded anything like it. The readings were so extreme that the operators thought their equipment was broken. War. Marshal Kethis ordered the defense fleet to assemble. 800 warships gathered around Thalos Prime, the homeworld of the Velen. It was the largest military force in their history. Kethis stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the approaching disturbance with cold confidence. He said, "The vermin have come to die. Let us welcome them properly." Then the sky tore open. The hyperspace window that formed above Thalos Prime was not a door. It was a wound in reality itself. Light and energy poured from the opening as something massive pushed through from the other side. Ships began to emerge. Human ships. One after another, they poured into normal space in an endless stream. Dreadnoughts the size of mountains. Cruisers swift as thought. Carriers that released swarms of fighters like angry bees. Destroyers and frigates and bombers beyond counting. The Velen sensors tried to count them. They failed. The numbers climbed higher and higher until the system simply gave up. 500,000 human warships now filled the space around Thalos Prime. So many that they blocked the light of the stars. The sun itself seemed to dim behind the wall of metal and fire. On the bridge of the Eternal Soul, Admiral Doyon Kong watched the Velen defense fleet on his tactical display. 800 ships against 500,000. It was not a battle. It was a message. Hannah Lim sat at her console, her hands steady, despite the storm in her heart. Admiral Kong nodded to her, and she opened all communication frequencies. The Admiral's voice echoed across the Thalos system, reaching every Velen ship, every station, every receiver on the planet below. He said, 6 months ago, you murdered 2,300,000 innocent people. You called us vermin. You told us to cower in our cradle. You thought we were prey?" He paused. He said, "We are not prey. We are humanity, and we remember every name, every child, every soul you stole. Today, you will learn why the galaxy should fear us." Overlord Thranis heard the message in his throne room on the surface of Thalos Prime. For the first time in his long life, he felt something he did not recognize. It was cold and tight in his chest. It made his hands shake. It was fear. War Marshal Kethis did not have time for fear. He screamed orders to his fleet, demanding attack formations and shield configurations. His ships moved to intercept the human armada. 800 against 500,000. Impossible odds. But Kethis had never retreated in his life. Captain Sunwoo Park coordinated the assault from her station beside Admiral Kong. Months of study had prepared her for this moment. She knew every weakness of the Velen ships, every flaw in their tactics. She said, "Ghostwing, you are clear for approach. Target their command ships. Main fleet advance in wave formation. Fire at will." The battle began. Lieutenant Jay Wano led the Ghostwing through the chaos of combat. His fighter screamed between explosions and energy beams, dodging death by centimeters. His squadron followed in perfect formation, each pilot moving as if guided by the same mind. He saw a Velen command ship ahead, its shields flickering as it fired its weapons. Sun Wu had taught him about that weakness. The shields dropped for a fraction of a second during each weapon discharge. It was a tiny window, but it was enough. Jaewon said, "Ghost Wing, target locked. Fire on my mark." 12 fighters unleashed their weapons at precisely the right moment. The missiles slipped through the flickering shields and struck the hull. The command ship exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness. Across the battlefield, similar scenes repeated themselves. Human captains exploited every weakness. Human pilots fought with skill and fury. Human ships pressed forward in waves that never stopped, never slowed, never hesitated. The Velen fought back with desperation. Their weapons destroyed hundreds of human ships. Their warriors screamed defiance as they fired their last shots. They were not cowards. They were not weak. But they were overwhelmed. For every human ship they destroyed, 10 more took its place. The endless armada pressed forward like a tide that could not be stopped. The Velen defense line crumbled. Their formations broke. Their ships fled in disorder. War Marshal Kethis stood on the bridge of his flagship as fire erupted around him. His shields had failed. His weapons were empty. His crew was dead. He sent one final transmission to Overlord Thranis, his voice filled with horror. He said, "They do not stop. They do not tire. They do not forgive. Overlord, we have awakened something terrible." 30 human dreadnoughts focused their fire on his flagship. For a single moment, the ship glowed brighter than the sun. Then it was gone. The battle lasted for hours. When it ended, the Velen defense fleet had ceased to exist. 800 ships reduced to floating debris. The greatest military force in Dominion history erased. But the human fleet did not move toward the planet. It did not begin bombardment. It did not rain fire on Velen cities the way the Velen had rained fire on Nova Dajin. Instead, the fleet held position, silent, waiting. Admiral Kang looked at the planet below. Millions of Velen lived on that world. Families, children, elders, innocents, who had nothing to do with the massacre. He could destroy them all with a single order. He could give the Velen exactly what they had given humanity, but he did not. He said, "We came here for justice, not revenge. We are not them. We will never be them." He turned to Hanalim. He said, "Open a channel to the planet. Let them know what we want." Hannah nodded, her eyes wet with tears she refused to shed. Her hands moved across her console, and once again, humanity's voice reached across the void. The next phase would begin. Not destruction. Not genocide. Something far more powerful. Justice. The silence after battle was heavier than the noise of war. 500,000 human ships hung in the darkness above Thalos Prime, their weapons ready but quiet. The debris of the Velen defense fleet drifted past them, twisted metal and frozen bodies spinning slowly in the void. On the surface of the planet, millions of Velen waited for death. They had seen what humanity could do. They had watched their mighty fleet vanish in hours. They expected fire to fall from the sky, just as their fire had fallen on Nova Dajin. They expected extinction, but the fire did not come. Admiral Do Yan Kong broadcast his terms to the planet below. His voice was calm and cold, without anger or hatred. It was the voice of a judge, not an executioner. He said, "We could burn your worlds to ash. We could do to you what you did to Nova Dajin. We have the power to end your civilization today. But we are not you. We are humanity." He paused. He said, "These are our terms. Overlord Thranis will surrender himself to face trial for the massacre of 2,300,000 people. Every Velen officer involved in the attack will be handed over for justice. The Dominion will pay reparations for 100 years. He paused again. He said, "If these terms are refused, if any Velen vessel ever threatens a human life again, we will return. And next time, we will not be merciful." The transmission ended. The fleet waited in his throne room. Overlord Thranis listened to the human demands with disbelief. Surrender? Trial? Reparations? These were the words of weakness. These were the terms that defeated species offered to their conquerors, not the other way around. But then he looked at his tactical display. 800 ships gone. 500,000 enemies surrounding his world. No reinforcements. No escape. His advisors argued with each other. Some demanded continued resistance. Others begged for negotiation. Ambassador Roland stood silently in the corner, watching his emperor with sad eyes. Thraina said, "What would you have me do, Ambassador? Surrender like a coward?" Roland shook his head slowly. He said, "Overlord, we were the cowards. We attacked farmers and children who had done us no harm. We murdered millions because we thought they were weak. We were wrong. This is the price of being wrong." Thraina stared at him for a long moment. Then his shoulders slumped. For the first time in his long reign, he looked old. He looked defeated. He said, "Summon the shuttle. Tell the humans I accept their terms." Commander Unichoi led the landing party that descended to Thalos Prime. Her first light soldiers moved with careful precision. Weapons ready, but not raised. They were not invaders. They were the hands of justice. The Velen capital was quiet as they landed. No crowds gathered. No soldiers opposed them. The streets were empty except for the echo of human boots on alien stone. Overlord Thrainus emerged from his palace in chains. Velen guards escorted him, their faces blank with shame. Behind him walked the officers who had commanded the ships above Nova Daigen. 37 individuals who had given the orders to fire, 37 killers who would now face judgment. Yuna watched them approach with eyes that showed no hatred. She had expected to feel satisfaction in this moment. She had expected triumph. Instead, she felt only exhaustion and sorrow. Thraina stopped before her. Up close, he looked smaller than his hologram had appeared. His gray skin was pale. His black eyes were empty. He said, "You could have destroyed us. Why did you not?" Yuna looked at him for a long moment before answering. She said, "We are not conquerors. We do not want your worlds or your resources. We only wanted to live in peace. You chose to make us your enemy. We did not choose this. You did." She gestured to her soldiers. She said, "Remember this lesson. Teach your children to remember. Humanity does not seek war, but we do not run from it. If you threaten us again, we will return, and we will remember everything." Thrainus was loaded onto a transport and taken to the Eternal Soul. He would be tried on Earth, in a court of human law. The evidence would be presented. The victims would be named. Every one of the 2,300,000 dead would be spoken aloud. What he had done. Aboard the flagship, Hannah Lim watched through the observation window as the transport docked. She had waited months for this moment. She had imagined it 1,000 times. Now that it had arrived, she did not know how to feel. The dead would not return. Her parents would not walk through the door. Old Taysom would not smile at her again. The children whose screams she had heard would never grow up. Justice could not bring them back, but justice could prevent more deaths. Justice could make the galaxy understand. Justice could ensure that no other colony would burn the way Nova Dodgen had burned. Admiral Kang stood beside her, his hands clasped behind his back. He was tired. 6 months of preparation, 4 hours of battle, and now the weight of victory. It pressed down on him like a mountain. He said, "It will not feel like enough." "It never does." Anna nodded. She said, "I know, but it is all we can give them." She turned to look at the Admiral. She said, "Thank you for not becoming like them, for showing the galaxy that strength does not mean cruelty." Kong bowed his head. He said, "That is what makes us human." The fleet began its journey home. Behind them, the Velen Dominion lay broken and humbled. Their empire would survive, but it would never threaten humanity again. The lesson had been taught. The message had been received. Across the galaxy, other species watched in silence. They had seen the human fleet. They had heard the human terms. They had witnessed something that would change their understanding of the universe forever. In their halls of government and their councils of war, leaders asked themselves a simple question. What would happen if they threatened humanity? The answer was written in the stars above Thalos Prime. 500,000 warships, an armada beyond imagination, and a species that would move the heavens themselves to protect its own. 1 year later, a memorial was built on the surface of Nova Dijon. Hanalim placed the first flower on the monument, a simple stone pillar carved with the names of every person who had died. The list was long. It took her hours to read them all. Admiral Kong stood beside her, now retired, his uniform replaced by simple clothes. He had done his duty. Now, he wanted only peace. And across the galaxy, in the records of a dozen civilizations, a new proverb took hold. It would be spoken by parents to children, by teachers to students, by leaders to their people. They said, "Do not wake the humans. Let them sleep. Because if they rise together, and nothing in the universe can stand against them." Hannah looked up at the artificial sun that shone over the memorial. Someday people would return to this world. Someday, children would play in new cities. Someday, the dead would be honored by the living. Until then, she would remember. Humanity would remember, and the galaxy would never forget.